To get the painting process done on this piece, I'm going to try a few new methods. It's always worth trying different ways of doing things rather than getting stuck on one way of doing it. Chance to try some new products, new methods, and see what happens. You know, that's what the hobby is all about, really. I think the initial pass I'm going to do is a little bit of a dry brushing with some metal paint. Could be any paint, doesn't really matter which type. So it won't be a complete coat. I just want to hint at it being metal, perhaps with some sort of primer over it, or some grey paint that's been painted over it. Because I think in the end of this, by the time I've done the weathering or the kind of rust layer stuff, there may be some of the initial bottom layer still showing through. And I'd be interested to see how that looks. And I really do mean a light layer on this. I'm not looking to cover the whole thing. So it's going to look quite scrappy. But I think this is going to be part of the process for this piece and trying out a few things. So like varying degrees of coverage and trying to avoid leaving obvious brush marks. However, some of these little marks that are already forming are quite nice. Little scratches and things. Just one thing to note, I think a side effect of using these kind of extruded or vacuum formed thin plastic packaging pieces, all these marks have appeared, these little kind of indentations have appeared over the past day, and that may be due to the primer, fully drying, maybe contracting, or some other process has gone on. So it's just to point out that those marks appeared on their own. They absolutely help the piece because they look like little natural dents and knocks, but they weren't intentional. They haven't appeared everywhere, but they seem to have come up quite regularly in the same sort of spots. So that could just be a side effect of the process, and maybe quite a useful side effect at that. There is a lot to be said for just a simple metal dry brush over a grey primer to give you, a very convincing metal object, especially if you want to stop there, no rust or further work needed. I mean, it couldn't be simpler. And just catching the edges and raised areas just always works and looks good. Maybe for doing like spaceship type paint jobs or things like that, just the grey primer with a little bit of further work in terms of dry brushing like this, or maybe a simple wash as well to go into the recesses. Wouldn't need much more, especially on these caps and things, when you just catch the raised areas, it gives it that nice sheen, metallic look. Won't go too heavy with it, that'll do for a start anyway. I'm going to try out this stuff here. It's called Scenic Rust by Deluxe Materials. I've never used it before. There's a few components to it that you get in the pack. A spatula for mixing the stuff up, a pipette, and then the actual products themselves. This stuff is meant to create very realistic rust effects, or real rust. This little container here has got what's called a powder, but it's, by the weight of it anyway, it must be metal powder. And there's a binder to mix with it, so it can be painted on. And then there's this stuff here, the developer, which rusts the powder that you've applied to the model. So I've seen some instructions where they say to mix this stuff 1-to-1 to make some sort of a paste that you can apply to the model. So just a fine grind. Another method may be to paint the binder, the liquid, onto the model and then sprinkle on this metal dust, this metal powder. I'll try it this way, and then just a cheap old brush to get this stuff onto the model. I'm not going to overthink it, I'm just going to apply it where I want. It's definitely going to create a three-dimensional rust. You know, this is not a paint, this is actual substance that's being added to the surface of the model. And you can actually see it. So it's going to be a very particular look. I suppose I'm looking to place it where rust might accumulate or settle due to whatever environmental effects this machine is being exposed to. So I'm largely going to stick to the horizontal surfaces. A definite brush wrecker, so again, don't use your very best stuff. My plan also is to do this top platform piece that I added, to do that separately, separate colour, just to try and imply that it was added at a later date. You know, the machine was found or positioned, and then at some point in its future, whoever was in charge of it decided to add a platform above, just so it kind of implies a little bit of narrative, a bit of history to it, rather than doing it all one colour. I like to do that with these things, you know, have different colours and finishes, rather than everything always just being one colour. That way you can sort of imply that the machine has maybe been repaired at times, or had parts replaced, panels replaced, maybe get some on the stairs, a bit of wear and tear on there. I'm kind of doing this as an experiment, maybe to try and help find some techniques that I can use on the larger shantytown models that I have. You know, it's a kind of look that I'm wanting to develop further and build more items for. And you end up with a lot of things that need painting that way. And quite large objects as well, you know, it's not just little figures. So it'd be nice to come up with some potential methods for dealing with some of those structures. So I'll carry on and get this covered as much as I want it, and then let it fully dry. Okay, I've let that binder and the metal powder now dry onto the model, so that should be okay. I can almost see it starting to rust up in the time that it's been sitting, but nonetheless we'll use this rust developer now. This stuff, like many of the products in the hobby, is pretty horrible, so they advise, you know, being careful with it, so I'm just going to wear the gloves when doing this stage. Okay, and then with another old brush, I'm just going to start painting this on across the model, especially where I've added the metal powder. We'll see what it does. Okay, that's the developer applied to the whole model. So it's just a case of leaving it for a number of hours to do its thing. So we'll come back and see how it looks a bit later. So that's the result after probably 2 or 3 days that I've left this. I did come back in and add a bit more of the developer, just to try and increase the effect. It seems the more you add, the more kind of rust effect appears. And you can see it's pretty good. I mean, you're dealing with what is essentially actual rust, so you can't really argue with it. It does have dimension, like I said before, so you start covering up details with the thicker areas of the rust, but I mean, that would happen in real life. But you get some nice colour from it. I think what's going to happen is the undercoat or the primer and then that dry brush of silver that I used is probably going to get lost in the effect now. You would either have to use a lot less rust, be more particular where you're using it. But I think for me, and for the sake of the experiment and trying out new things, I think I'm going to try adding a bit more just to kind of patch in where I've left some of that grey primer still showing, and then later we'll do a paint job where we reveal some of this rust and it will look like it's bubbling up from under the paintwork. But just to let you see at this stage, so it's quite a convincing effect. But using the same method as before, I'm going to patch in some more of this Scenic Rust and try and get the whole thing essentially looking like it's rusted over. Just doing some weathering with a sponge on the ladder and platform. The plan now is to keep the grey section, that little platform area, as I think it's a nice contrast to the kind of orangey brown colour. Also been picking out some of the other items with a little bit of colour and started the basing. In essence, just to let you see the rust, how it's formed, how it looks. So it's definitely it's a couple of applications of the product to the model. Just reapplying some of the binder where I wanted to patch in some more of the rust effect. You then let the stuff dry, and then you can just use a nice dry brush and apply the metal powder directly onto the binder, and it sticks in place, and then you can apply the developer. So you can see the effect that it's had. It's a very convincing rust, as you'd expect, because it is rust. And although I said that I might cover this up and do a paint job over it and then expose some, I think that would sort of spoil what I've done here in trying out the Scenic Rust stuff. So I think I might just keep that as is. You can still do some general weathering with some enamels, but one of the things I want to do first is just get some transfers, some the water slide decals added. I've got some numbers that I'm going to add up on here somewhere just to help sell the idea that these parts are scavenged from somewhere else, and there were maybe some numbers left behind that you wouldn't take the time to remove. And then I've got some kind of white text piece that I'm going to add to the computer panel on here, which miraculously is still operational considering the state of the machine overall. Worth adding some of the AK Interactive engine oil just in some of these parts here. This stuff's useful because it just adds a glossy finish. Always just helps imply that something's getting out from the machine. But probably best doing it sparingly. And then because I tend to use it on most of my terrain builds, some of the panel liner, the sand and desert camouflage panel liner, and used with plenty of the enamel thinner just to let it spread around. That'll dry and produce a nice sandy, dusty appearance. And then to finish off the base, just with some weathering powders, just a normal process shown before. Get that nice red rust, ash wastes look. And then really that's going to be about it. Okay, so that's it for this biscuit tray kit bash. Been able to make use of some new products, try out some new techniques, and I think in terms of making a believable rust or rusty machinery, I think it's worked pretty well. Quite happy with the results. And what was a really simple kit bash, there was nothing to it, just a few extra parts glued on to the plastic biscuit tray. It just means that you're making use of something that would have been chucked into the bin. You get some nice unique pieces of scatter terrain. The overall effect is really good. The Deluxe Materials Scenic Rust product, I think it works really good. You've got to have a lot of patience though, it's not a quick process. You've got to leave it to develop over a number of days, maybe return to it, apply more. So that is the only thing that slows down the process compared to just painting it or spraying it with a colour. There's a bit more time involved, but very easy to apply. So hopefully there's been some useful stuff during the video you can apply to your own scatter terrain builds. Maybe if at Christmas you've got some empty biscuit trays or other types of packaging that you're maybe going to throw out, have a second look and see if you can imagine it as some sort of ash wastes scavenged machinery. Until the next video, thanks very much for watching.